Now I'd like to talk about some of the events in Scrum, and the first one is sprint planning. Sprint planning occurs at the beginning of the sprint, and it's determining what will be delivered. So which items from that product backlog are we going to work on during this iteration, this sprint. We want to base that on past performance and capacity. So we talked about empirical data. If we've been able to consistently deliver 5 things each sprint, then you can, with a good deal of confidence, say we should be able to deliver 5 things. But what if somebody's going to be on vacation and those type of things? Then you'll plan for specific capacity in that sprint. You then want to determine how it's going to be delivered. And this is where you actually create the sprint backlog in this meeting. And that's where we, again, come up with all the tasks, development, design, testing, documentation, whatever it is we need to do to make that product increment to be done. And this creates that sprint backlog that we'll use to manage the entire sprint for the rest of the iteration. And now let's talk about the sprint itself. Usually a sprint is time boxed to 1 month or less. And this can change depending on the confidence of the team, the availability of stakeholders, all sorts of different things go into determining how long your sprint is. But once you come up with that length of sprint, you need to stick to it. If you're going to go with 2 weeks, unless there's a large reason to change, stick to 2 weeks as much as you can. It also has a clearly stated sprint goal. So what are we trying to accomplish during this sprint? Something that the team can kind of rally around, like a mini vision for each sprint. At the end of the sprint, you should have a potentially releasable increment. It doesn't mean you're actually going to release it. So the first sprint, when you just get maybe the login screen done, that doesn't mean you're just going to give a login screen. That doesn't provide enough customer value to go to the market. But everything that was done around that login screen should be ready to go into production with as little event and fanfare as possible. So potentially releasable doesn't mean you actually release it. And then lastly, the scope is set by the Scrum team. Often you'll have marketing or you'll have sales come in and say we have to have things done in this timeline. But if the Scrum team can't match that pace, we need to make sure that they are determining what that pace is. So that can then be reflected and we can make decisions on moving things in and out of sprints to make enough value in a release. The next event I want to talk about is the most maligned event in Scrum, the daily Scrum or the stand-up meeting. And the reason it's mostly maligned is that every time I talk to somebody and they say, yeah, we're Scrum or yeah, we're Agile, this is the first thing they mention. We have stand-up meetings, so we're Agile. Well, this is only a part of it. It's a very essential part of it, but it's only a part of the whole Scrum process. The daily Scrum is time boxed to 15 minutes. A small team, 5 to 9 people, with a very concise sprint backlog should be able to get all the information relayed within that amount of time. If you're going too much longer, you're probably getting into too much detail. This is not a design meeting. It's not to talk about those types of things. You can have other meetings or gatherings to do that. We really want to inspect our work done yesterday. So what did you accomplish yesterday? What tasks were done? What goals have we met already? And then you want to talk about what's the plan for today. What am I going to work on today? What are you working on? Oh, I might be working on something in the same area. Let's make sure we talk about that. And then lastly, we want to talk about any impediments that we can identify that might be blocking us or affecting our work so that that can be immediately resolved and get us flowing as fast as possible. We previously talked about the product backlog, and we need to know that it's dynamic. It's always changing. So we need to have some event where we actually go back and look at the product backlog and refine it. That's called a product backlog grooming method, and often called a refinement meeting when you look at some of the scrum.org documentation. So the product backlog grooming method is for clarifying and estimating new items. As a new item comes on a product backlog, the team's going to need to review it, ask any clarifying questions, product owner answer those questions, they can provide a high-level estimate, so then the product owner can appropriately place it on the product backlog. We also need to review higher priority items. These items should be at the top of the list. They're more valuable. We're going to be working on them sooner than later, so we can talk about a little bit more detail around those. And if you remember, we talked about just-in-time requirements and last responsible moment. Well, a couple of sprints before we actually deliver something is a good time to start getting some of that detail. And you also want to get less detail on lower priority items. There might be the urge to try to be more detailed and be more precise, but if something that's low priority and it's at the bottom of the backlog, we don't have to talk about it in that much detail. If we get a high-level estimate and all agree on it, you can move on. We'll see it again when we groom it later as it rises up on the backlog. And the team should spend about 10% of the sprint working on product backlog grooming. In a 2-week sprint, that would be about 8 hours. Doesn't mean you have to have an 8-hour meeting, but you should have periodic times between all the different activities in the sprint where you're talking about these items on the product backlog, asking your clarifying questions, providing those estimates, coming back if those clarifications need some outside SMEs or other people to answer those questions. And you have to remember that that's part of the overhead of just-in-time requirements, and you need to plan for it. So don't fill up your entire sprint with items you're going to be working on and forget that you need to dedicate that 10% of time to grooming the backlog with your product owner. Next, we want to talk about the sprint review. And the sprint review is all about demoing the product increment. You want to make sure you only demo things that were actually done. You may mention things that you didn't get completed, but there is no value in actually showing that information because it's not completed code you can actually deliver. You want to make sure you elicit feedback from stakeholders. So remember we talked about pigs and chickens? This is a great chicken meeting. They should come in and provide feedback. I like that. Oh, can we move that? Can we do this? And we should take all that information and update our product backlog from it. So we're planning on what to do next in this meeting as well. And then finally, you're going to review the release plan. It'll be updated based on our new empirical evidence of how we've performed and new information that's been coming in. So we want to make sure we kind of explore that plan, see what's coming up, make sure everybody's good with that, and then move on. It's a great ending ceremony for the sprint. And then lastly, I want to talk about the sprint retrospective. The retrospective is all about the Scrum team inspecting and adapting. So we want to talk about things that went well. What went well in the sprint? What things should we continue doing and do more of? What things didn't go well? What things could be better? So these are things that we might start doing or stop doing or make some adjustments. And it's all about us reviewing the process, figuring out what's working and what's not working, and making changes. We also want to make sure we have a plan for those improvements, that we don't just talk about our problems and then go off and keep doing the same things. If you remember, we talked about a lessons learned where we just kept doing the same thing over and over again. That's not what a sprint review is about. It's about continuous improvement and actually making action items that you'll carry into the next sprint that you can then review and make sure they're working. So putting all this together, let's talk about the product owner and his team getting together with their Scrum Master, creating a product backlog during grooming sessions. Then in a sprint planning meeting, they'll create that sprint backlog. They'll start executing in the sprint, and every 24 hours they're going to have that daily stand-up and the daily Scrum where they're talking about what they're doing, what they're planning on next, any impediments. And after a sprint, which could be 1 week to 4 weeks, they should actually deliver a product increment and do that in sprint review. Demo that to your stakeholders. Then figure out what you're going to work on next. Hold your sprint retrospective and talk about things that could go better and things you can improve on. And then you rinse and repeat the entire process, going back to grooming and back to the sprint planning. And the cycle repeats itself.